really, really nice to meet you. You're so inspirational, and I applaud you for continuing this journey of fighting the good fight for all of us all these years. It's amazing.
Yeah, no, thanks very much. I mean, hey, that's what I do, I guess.
That is what you do. And the band started over 30 years ago, for anybody who doesn't know. You guys are still going strong. But did you ever think you'd be an author?
Um, no, I really didn't plan any of this stuff out. I was surprised that we lasted 5 years. Never mind writing books and doing all this other stuff. But no, I didn't have any plans like that at all.
Well, when I Shithead came out, gosh, how many years ago was that now? Help me out.
Oh, three. Yeah.
Oh, three, that's what it was. And it's now in its third printing. How did that book come together for you, Joe?
It kind of was a bit of a transition. I had a sound man that, because we'd drive around in the old D.O.A. van on tour, and, we'd have a couple of, like, beers or whatever, and, of course, all the old war stories would come out as we went. And my sound man, this guy from Kansas, he said, you know what, Joe, you should get up there and do like spoken word, right? And look at your friends Biafra and Henry Rollins. They're doing well with this. I went, okay, I could do that, right? I mean, how hard can it be, right? So then the spoken word kind of grew. The stories grew into like, hey, well, why don't you do a book? Other people are putting out books, right? So it kind of transitioned like that over a period of from '99, kind of got the idea, and then finally '03, I signed a contract to do the book, and then I sadly realized I actually had to put some work into it. So at first I was typing an hour a day, and by the end it was 10 hours a day, right? Because I was so far behind the deadline, right? So, but it all got. And then I managed to delete the last chapter, which infuriated me greatly. But so I rewrote it.
So how long did it take you to write the book?
I think it stretched out over about like 8 months. That particular one, right? The new one was like really quick, right? The Talk Minus Action, we started that in November, and we had all the text. I was doing the editing of the text and arrangement of the posters and photos and stuff like in March when I was in Australia.
Oh, wow. Very cool. Now, the new book is Talk Minus Action Equals Zero, and it's more of an illustrated history of D.O.A., but did your first book in any way lead into this project?
Well, I mean, when I wrote I Shithead in '03, I really thought I would write another book again pretty quickly because it did pretty well, and I thought, okay, this really wasn't that tough because basically that book and the new one, I just tried to write like you were just sitting down talking to me, as opposed to sort of taking a different tact with it or like some sort of weird overview of the whole thing. And I just tried to be like personal and personable, right? So. I don't think it really led into it other than the fact that I wanted to write another book, and I thought this was kind of a good idea. I asked the same publisher, Arsenal Pulp Press, if they wanted to do another book, and they were into it. So I had about 16 boxes of old posters from all the years in D.O.A., which I hadn't really meant to collect, but I guess I had collected. And so I went through and I found about maybe 300 or 400 of the best ones that had the kind of the best stories attached with them, and I put them in a couple big boxes and went down to the publisher, and they had a big boardroom table, and I dumped the posters upside down out onto the boardroom table and said, "There's your book." And they went, "What the fuck?" Then it was pretty quick because basically it was a matter of putting the posters in chronological order. And then it was pretty easy for me to write the stories, right? Because, then you go like, okay, you had a bit of a guide, and I also had some old tour schedules, which really helped too. Yeah.
And does anybody ever correct your stories?
Probably my bandmates would think they're all wrong, right? So, but you know what I say? They can write their own book anytime they want.
That's right. See, it's funny.
Yeah.
I just got a preview copy of the new Duff McKagan book, which you are mentioned in, by the way.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
He's a good guy.
And he says right at the front, "These are my stories as I remember them."
Yeah, no, and that's a good way to clarify it, right? Because rather than people arguing, I have had some of their band guys come up and say like, "Oh man, you got this wrong," or "Yeah, you didn't think of that. I did, right?" I'm going, "That's not the way I recall it," right? So good for Duff. I'm with him on that, right? So.
Yeah, is it fun to look back on that stuff?
It is. When I first started doing this book we finished our tour last October last year, and then I really realized I had to get to the book really quickly. So I started going through it. So at first I was dawdling as I was going through the boxes, going, oh yeah, this is very funny, looking at each poster. Then after a couple of days of that, I went, holy Christ, I better get moving here. So I was like, I became a lot more methodical, right? So if I did see something that I thought was particularly funny, yeah, I would go like, yeah, that was a laugh, or that was horrible, or some, it wasn't all like fun and games, that's for sure.
Yeah. Well, one of the things I found kind of surprising that you did include in the book were some old contracts.
Yeah, some of them would probably have a lot more of those. We have tons of those left. Obviously, visually they weren't that stimulating to look at, but the one I thought was pretty interesting is one from Dirksen Miller Productions from the the Mabuhay Gardens in San Francisco, which is like the home of punk rock and stuff. And I saw a pay stub there. It was $107 and some odd cents, right? All properly figured down to the penny by my old buddy Dirk Dirksen, right? So
Is that in there for to help the kids avoid any pitfalls? Or
well, they can look at it and say, well, I sure didn't get paid much, but I think probably back in that day we thought $107 was pretty good. We're going, wow, we actually got paid, right? I mean, we did everything on such a skeleton basis, and it wasn't like some people. The bands never get anywhere. I think a lot of times because they never venture out and really just take a chance on it. Whereas we decided once we had the Disco Sucks single out, like in mid '78, we started mailing them the singles to college stations and in magazines, or in North America and Europe, and we got a really great response from it. And then people started inviting us to come do shows. And so the very first tour down to San Francisco, we had 2 shows, and we had no car, we had no gear, so I took a train. Chuck and Randy took a bus, and our lead guitar player Brad hitchhiked down to California with his guitar. And we arrived at the show, and the guy around the Mabuhay, Dirk, said, "Where's all your gear?" And I said, "Well, we don't have any." And then he looked at me and said, "Are all you Canadians this fucking stupid?" Right? And I really didn't have an answer for him. It's just like, so it was totally, fly by the seat of your pants. But I think sometimes that's, hey, it's great to be organized, right? I'm all for it these days. But when you're young, I think you just got to get out there and just, go kick ass, right? So.
Yeah. Are you a little bit envious of all this technology these kids have today? But boy, that would have made DIY a lot easier back then, wouldn't it?
It would have. I mean, because we used to go get contacts for gigs and record distribution, stuff like that. We'd go down to our local favorite record store and we'd look at the magazines, and we'd have a sheet of paper and a pen, and we didn't have the money to buy the magazines, so we'd just write down addresses and phone numbers, and then go away and get to the phone or to a pay phone or whatever. And some shows we booked our first tour. We're like pretty well the first punk rock band from the West to play in Poland, like in 1985. And it's like it was hard to get in, because the martial law had just ended there after the whole general strike situation. We booked that tour by mail. We sent a letter. We got a letter back that says, "Oh, sure, we can set 6 shows. Come at this time period." So our manager booked everything else, by phone in the other parts of Europe, but he actually booked this kind of historic tour by mail. And I think kids these days would just go, huh? It's just like it's so opposite of the way it is now, right? But I think the thing in that day, in that way, that I think the problem that new bands have, unless they're like just get a really lucky break or they find somebody with a lot of money to promote them, is that they have a really hard time getting above the noise floor, because it's really easy to get your music out there, but there's so many bands doing the same thing, it's really, really hard to get noticed.
Yeah, no, that's very, very true. And I was just trying to think, I bet you there's not a kid alive right now who could figure out the postage to Poland.
Oh, I know. I was in a gas station. We just came back from the Midwest, and I didn't want to use my cell phone just because of the long distance charge. So I asked these 2 kids, they're about 20, in the gas station, "You got a pay phone around here?" And they looked at me like I was from Mars, right? I went like, "Okay, thanks, guys. See you later." Right?
Yeah. As I mentioned to you, you're in Duff book. You're also mentioned in the new book that's coming out, biography of Dave Grohl, called "This Is a Call." And,
okay, cool. Yeah.
Yeah.
He's a really nice guy.
So you're all over the place. And as you know, we're celebrating the 20th anniversary of grunge here in the States with Nirvana's 20th anniversary and Pearl Jam. Right. But you have a very interesting story from your first book about a Portland show that you played. and a certain couple met there?
Right, right. Yeah, I mean, I didn't really even know about this, but I guess it was a Portland show. I don't know, like late '80s or whatever. I guess something like that, right? Because I know we played with Nirvana. They were like the first on the bill at the show in Seattle. We played in '89, I think, or '90. I can't remember, right? And but anyway, so probably I guess a year or two before that we played in Portland. That's where Courtney Love and Kurt Cobain, unfortunately, they met. You know, because I feel sad because Kurt Cobain was a really brilliant songwriter, right? And would have been a whole bunch more good albums, I'm sure, if he had stayed alive, right? But I didn't know this, but I guess Kurt had told Nardwuar. Do you know Nardwuar?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. So this is where I got that information that he gave me that factoid, right? And Nardwuar is pretty good at digging up, factoids about everything as far as music goes, right? So
yeah. Oh, you know, maybe we should explain who he is just in case somebody else doesn't know.
Yeah, Nardwuar, he's a radio DJ, host, bon vivant from Vancouver, BC. His handle is Nardwuar, the Human Serviette, and he's probably one of the funniest people on the continent with his interviews, because most people, when they meet him, they want to kill him within the first 30 seconds of the interview, right? But he's actually a really nice guy and a really great interviewer.
I want to talk to you a little bit about the term hardcore, because you guys are known as popularizing that term. But
right.
So what was it about that word that you felt best described you guys, and what does it really mean to you?
Right. Well, I guess back in those days, the only use of hardcore was with like pornography films, right? And it hadn't come into, like, people don't imagine. You know how so in the common vernacular these days that people say, oh, that's hardcore, man, or this is so hardcore, that's so old school. You hear that constantly, almost to the point of ad nauseum, right? So we were in San Francisco about late '80, and we'd already put out our first album, and we had done demos for the second album we were getting ready to do in the beginning of '81. And we saw this article in San Francisco in this magazine, and I can't remember the guy's name who wrote it or the name of the magazine, but it talked about this new type of music that it said the music was unlike the music in New York, and it wasn't copying the music in London, but it was really a West Coast phenomenon. But he also threw in Minor Threat there too, as part of the East Coast part of it, right? But what he specifically named, the writer in this article, because the article was called Hardcore, was D.O.A, the Dead Kennedys, Black Flag, the Avengers, bands like that. And when we got back, we were starting to work on the album, and our manager, Ken, said, well, how about an album called Hardcore '81? And the way we started to kind of figure that out was just like, it was hardcore because it was like non-compromising, and it was like very straightforward, and it wasn't like a lot of thrills to it. And it was also like hardcore, like in the political attitude too, right? So
yeah, well, is that part of what led to your activism as well? Are you being recognized as an activist?
No, I think that started when I was a teenager. I was involved in this march organized by Greenpeace back when I was in high school, and we were protesting nuclear bomb testing by the American government in the islands some islands near Alaska, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so we marched around the American consulate chanting and holding signs, and probably the people in the consulate weren't even there, or if they were, they were probably laughing at us anyways, right? And that started when I was about 16, and then I quite got into it because my brother and sister, like this whole sort of political background, came from a lot. They're older than me, and they listened to like a lot of folk music, from the Weavers to Woody Guthrie and all the way up to Bob Dylan. This was like kind of listened to an awful lot of this when I was a kid, right? So that kind of consciousness sort of crept in, and the politics of the time, the Vietnam War was really raging when I was like 8, 9 years old, and the interesting thing was that war wasn't censored in those days the way it is now.
Yeah.
You saw the blood and guts right there on TV, right? And so I got into environmentalism and being an activist. Probably from the time I was like 16 onwards, right? And it escalated from there.
It really seems as though that there are fewer and fewer musicians who are willing to take that chance and to speak out and truly say what they believe in. And why is it so important to you, Joe, to continue to fight that fight. And are you disappointed that more people won't speak out?
Well, I think that I think people. I mean, first off, I mean, I do it because that's what I am, and that's what I do. And I've always thought that there's two types of musicians. There's like all musicians, artists try to entertain in some way or other, right? But then there's a smaller category that try to entertain, and they also try to say something with their art, right? And I really took a lot out of like the bands from late '60s and early '70s, like Jimi Hendrix would probably be my favorite musician because he was incredibly talented and really great to listen to, but he also had a lot to say with his music and lyrics and stuff like that. You know, and people don't think of him as a great songwriter, I mean lyricist, but he really is. He just kind of hit the right spot at the right time, right? You know, and so that kind of, you know, so I consider myself in a different category, and I do this because I think, you know, you have to keep on trying to change the world. Like when we started out, there was horrible things in the world, right? I'm sorry, when D.O.A. started out, you know, warmongers, greed, sexism, racism, and I look around, it's 2011, and those things are still right there, right? They haven't really changed. In some cases, they've gotten worse, right? So I think that's that. And as far as being disappointed, I think it takes a big event. Like when you saw like the thing with the Vietnam War, that was a real thing that people coalesced around. And then also in the 80s, with the start of this punk rock thing, was the nuclear arm buildup. And you know, and I always say the one guy who's most responsible for punk rock in the United States was former President Ronald Reagan, because his policies were so horrible that people reacted against it, right? So he's like a rallying point. So, but I'm kind of surprised in this sort of post 9/11 world that there hasn't been more reaction from bands and artists. When you think about George Bush for president for 8 years, wars ongoing, lack of freedom, less and less rights, more spying. You know what I mean, right? It's
Yeah.
Like, it seems to me that people should be active and be making noise. I mean, I think they are a little bit. I mean, obviously the post 9/11 thing, that changed our world in a massive way, and it took a couple of years before people activists kind of get their bearing again to say what they really thought again. You know, like, I don't know, people were running a little bit scared, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think the title of your book, and also, you know, one of the mantras of the band, talk minus action equals zero, is such a powerful statement. Where'd you guys come up with that?
It was on this cover of this anarchist magazine in Vancouver, and we saw it, and, you know, we knew our old manager was an anarchist. You know, some may say an anarcho-capitalist, right? But, you know, whatever. You know, it's just the way we put it. And we saw that slogan, so we asked the magazine if we could use it, and we originally used it on the very back of, there's a 8-song EP called War on 45 that came out in 1982, so that's when we started using that.
Well, you guys are, as I said, 30 years, still going strong. What's next for you guys? You have a tour coming up.
Yeah, we have a Canadian tour coming up 2 weeks or so, and we're actually just working on songs for a new album, which we'll record this winter. And so basically that will kind of coincide, we'll be out for like our 35th anniversary, and there'll be like one facet of the album will have a real wrinkle to it. It'll be nothing like D.O.A.'s done before, right? So musically, I mean, right? So yeah, so that'll be out probably like April or May next year, right? So
a few years ago, you were named one of British Columbia's all-time most influential people. How did that feel?
That was pretty funny. It's like it was just funny to get on the list, right? And then I looked at the list and I thought, oh, there's all these people that shouldn't be on the list at all. So I thought, I belong here. Take that person off, right? There was some real drab personalities that had done fuck all, right? So you know, it was pretty cool. It was pretty funny. Like we had a good laugh. But they finally did the final poll, and it turned out that because of internet voting that I actually won the whole thing. I ended up being the most influential person. Now, obviously, that is not true. There's people in this province that have done, you know, huge things that changed tons of people's lives, right? But we found through the power of the internet and asking fans to vote that I end up winning the poll. So so, you know, it was me and my son, oldest son, helped orchestrate that. So when we saw that, we laughed our guts out, right? So yeah. It's all good fun, though.
It is good fun. Oh, speaking of good fun, before we go, I was checking out some of your merch, and I have to say, the Throbblehead, that is genius. Is it your bestseller?
It's doing pretty good. Yeah, I think it's pretty hilarious. Speaking of that, one day I actually had a show, and I missed Father's Day. So my daughter, who's 21, she grabbed the bobblehead and put it at the end of the kitchen table, on the table where I usually sit. So, and then they were fighting about something with the kids, and she went, "Shh, Dad doesn't like fighting at the dinner table." Yeah, it's pretty rich, right? You know, the guy did a great job, I think. So
cool. Well, Joe, it was a thrill to talk to you. I really appreciate the messages that you're trying to get out there, and the fact that you keep doing it, and a lot of people have given up, and I can't thank you enough. And it was a pleasure to talk to you today.
Yeah, no, nice to talk to you too as well.